Good morning. Welcome to Just for Today, a time of eclectic reading, sharing of perspectives, meditation, and prayer. I'm Reverend Rafe Ellis, Senior Minister and Spiritual Leader of the newly joined Centers for Spiritual Living of Greater Baltimore and Columbia. Today is October 25th. And this morning I'm reading from Just for Today, which is a book that is recovery based on just little readings about different topics with affirmations. And this morning I opened it up to page 181, and my eyes landed on the third paragraph. The title of this reading is Surrender, and it in the Just for Today format is for January 23rd, but we're using it for October 25th. Most of the pain we experience comes from fighting, not surrendering. In fact, when we surrender, the pain ends and hope takes its place. We begin to believe that all will be well, and after some time, we realize that our lives are much better as a result. We feel the same way we did when we gave up the illusion that we could control our using. Relieved, free, and filled with fresh hope. Just for today, is there a surrender I need to make today? I will remember my first surrender and remind myself that I don't need to fight anymore. It reminds me of Ernest Holmes' conversation in the Science of Mind text, where he's talking about how we oftentimes argue for our limitations. And the whole thing of control seems to put us in this tangled hierarchy loop of trying to control our control by letting go of control. The problem is our whole focus is still in control. And surrender is stopping. And if we remember, those of us that have raised children or been around children, or even if we can remember when we were a child, stopping isn't necessarily the problem. It's what happens after we stop. And so this idea of surrender can be very layered, if you will, because we know how to fight. We're familiar with the battle. We know all the players. We know the terrain. And we get invested in winning. And surrender is oftentimes translated as losing. And perhaps there's another perspective for us, that surrender simply means not having to fight anymore. And that there's an uncomfortable demand in this activity of surrender that we become vulnerable to the unknown. We become spiritually uncomfortable long enough to experience something new. That we actually, more than surrendering something, perhaps we surrender to something, which calls up the idea in the human experience that we are surrendering to the enemy. But what if we're surrendering to our inner self? What if we're surrendering to that higher consciousness? Words are so challenging, aren't they? That we're surrendering to the truth of our being, that we're surrendering to our unlimited potential, that we're surrendering to a guidance that requires no control. What if we're surrendering to hope? What if we're surrendering to an us that we've never met and can't even yet imagine? But that the act of surrendering opens us up to be able to glimpse that and begin to experience that we are far more than we ever imagined ourselves to be. And that our victory is not in winning, but that our victory is in surrendering, because it allows us to shift our focus from an enemy focus to a victor focus. That's what comes alive in me when I read this. And so I'm going to read this one more time and take us into our time of meditative practice. And it's simply 5 minutes of practicing being present with whatever happens. Right? If during that 5 minutes your nose itches, scratch it. If your brain goes to writing your grocery list, okay, write the grocery list. Just be present, not trying to make anything happen, not trying to push anything away, but just practicing being still and being present. So here's the reading again. Most of the pain we experience comes from fighting, not surrendering. In fact, when we surrender, the pain ends and hope takes its place. We begin to believe that all will be well, and after some time, realize that our lives are much better as a result. We feel the same way we did when we gave up the illusion that we could control our using. Relieved, free, and filled with hope. Is there a surrender I need to make today? I will remember my first surrender and remind myself that I don't have to fight anymore. So let's take that into our meditation. And so in this moment, I surrender. I surrender my human recognition. I surrender to that idea of one power greater than myself, greater than any expression in this physical form, and greater because it is the one power, the one presence, the one substance that is expressing itself as each form, nameless, changeless. It is the substance, fully infusing every expression of itself with itself. We know it by many, many names. In this moment, I choose to recognize it as God. God in, through, and as creation. The multiplicity of expression with no separation. And so I know that I am that in form. That all of this infinite godness has residence as me in this experience of life, of this journey of expression. And I recognize that while all of God is fully present in, through, and as me, the individualized me is never all of it. And so as I recognize that, I recognize that every expression in this physical realm is it. That what is true of me is true of all. And so I allow myself to know, to experience, to embody this idea, this reality of surrender, as surrendering to that power, as surrendering to the only power there is, God itself. Surrendering to that guidance, that infinite intelligence that is me, that is all of life. Releasing all of the lies that tell me fighting against is the solution. And I surrender to that inner guidance, that infinite intelligence within me that already knows exactly what to do, how to do it, when to do it. That infinite possibility that sources every idea that it sparks to express in, through, and as me of a portal of itself. And as I accept, as I surrender to that about myself, I surrender to that about everyone else. And it moves me to the activity of exploration, of curiosity, of a joyful experience of vulnerability where I no longer need to control anything. And I no longer fight against being controlled. I simply embody, surrender to being all that I came here to be. I surrender to allowing each individualized expression of God to be all that each came here to be, which calls me to surrender all of my opposition to that. To surrender every belief that conflicts with the full use of consciousness, free of guilt, shame, and blame. And so I let go. And I am grateful. I am grateful for the activity of law that doesn't care about all of the mental gymnastics that I do in this human realm. The activity of law that is blissfully, joyfully impartial, that responds to every thought, every belief, every idea that I or any of us hold, because it is simply acting upon the movement of consciousness. Consciousness moved by idea, consciousness moved by intention, acted upon by law, reflecting back to each and every one of us exactly what has been thought into it. And in the truth of wholeness, in the absence of any idea of separation, everything reflected back is informing each and every expression of God that we are fully empowered to participate in the mental healing process. And so I embrace that reflection, informing the work in consciousness that I am called to do, free of control, free of judgment, surrendering wholly, completely to the process. And so I let go. I surrender it all. I surrender my whole self to simply being that hollow bone, that portal of creation, free of resistance. Ashe. Shalom. Aho. Amin. Amen. And so it is. Namaste.